Atalaia this morning, we've seen those German police officers searching derelict buildings in this large area of land. I've seen them moving a piece of specialist equipment that we believe is part of this geo-radar tool that they wanted to bring in and use to search beneath the earth in specific locations.
It's evidence that police have begun tangible searches for Madeleine McCann. They spent at least a day, according to a man we spoke to in the village, at least a day here at this rather large, the biggest of the 3 wells that they've been exploring. So they were here for a day, police, firefighters, with specialist equipment like ropes and harnesses. And although no images have emerged of what took place here, we got a very vivid description from the man who was driving past.
"18 years after Madeleine McCann vanished, investigators have returned to Portugal, not to search the beaches or apartments, but to drain an old well hidden in the hills of Atalaia. Beneath the sunlight, pumps roar as muddy water spirals down, chasing a question that refuses to die. Why was this well ignored in 2007? What connects it to Christian Brueckner, the man who once lived only 600 meters away? And if water can preserve, what secrets has it kept for nearly 2 decades? Do you believe the truth still lies beneath the surface, waiting to be found? Comment your thoughts below, and let's begin. The summer of 2025 brought investigators back to the same stretch of Portuguese coastline that has haunted the world for nearly 2 decades. Cameras captured a stark image: officers in heavy protective gear clearing overgrown weeds, lowering industrial pumps into a dark circular pit, and running coils of thick hose across the scorched ground. The hum of machinery echoed over Atalaia, a desolate area just 5 kilometers west of Praia da Luz. Dust rose as water began to drain from the mouth of an old well that locals say hadn't been touched since the early 2000s. For the first time since Madeleine McCann vanished, the well itself not a resort, not a suspect's car, was the focal point of an international search. This latest operation was not random. It marked the continuation of a renewed push led by German prosecutors and Portuguese judicial police investigating Christian Brueckner, the man officially designated as the prime suspect in Madeleine's disappearance. Coordinated with British liaison officers, the search unfolded quietly at dawn on June 10, 2025, and extended over 3 days. Television crews from ITV and AP described a joint task force moving systematically across a fenced plot of land, alternating between manual excavation and sophisticated ground-penetrating radar scans. The site, near a cluster of abandoned farm buildings in Atalaia, lies within walking distance of a derelict house that Brueckner once occupied in the mid-2000s. According to police maps released to the press, the well, narrow, deep, and partially sealed by debris, sits just off an unmarked dirt road that runs toward the sea. At first glance, it looked like a forgotten relic of rural Algarve life, a crumbling stone ring half swallowed by wild grass and fig trees. But to detectives, it represented something else: a possible answer hidden in plain sight. Investigators believe that if a body or personal items were ever placed inside, the constant movement of groundwater could have dispersed organic traces beyond the reach of surface searches. That possibility, combined with the well's proximity to Brueckner's known routes, was enough to justify a full-scale operation. ITV News correspondent Ellie Pitt, reporting from the scene, noted that officers were using a geo-radar tool capable of mapping underground cavities and detecting irregularities consistent with disturbed soil or buried objects. Nearby, others worked with shovels and mechanical diggers, stripping the top layer of clay to expose the shaft. "We've seen them searching derelict buildings and excavating close to the well," she said. "It's day 2 of what police describe as a massive operation to find any evidence in relation to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann." Sources quoted by Associated Press and Bild confirmed that this renewed search was driven by a tip-off obtained earlier in 2025, reportedly suggesting that Brueckner had used the area as a dumping site during his years in Portugal. Whether that information came from a witness, an inmate confession, or digital records remains undisclosed. What is known is that German prosecutors in Braunschweig were facing a deadline. Brueckner's release was expected in September 2025, and without physical evidence, formal charges in the McCann case would remain impossible. As one official put it, "If we don't find material proof now, we may never get another chance." The well's location between Brueckner's old residence and a narrow footpath descending toward the ocean also matched a pattern of previous sites searched by authorities. In 2023, police had combed through the Arade Dam, a reservoir Brueckner once called his little paradise. Before that, in 2020, divers had inspected 3 abandoned wells near Budens, about a 15-minute drive from Praia da Luz. Those expeditions yielded nothing, yet investigators kept circling back to the same theme: water. Each effort seemed to follow the belief that if Madeleine's body was ever hidden, it might have been submerged, preserved by darkness, protected by depth. This particular well, however, carried new logistical appeal. It was accessible by vehicle, shielded from public view, and close enough to the suspect's former property to make sense within a tight time frame. On the night of May 3, 2007, forensic hydrologists consulted by Portuguese media explained that small, narrow wells like this often connect to natural aquifers that feed into the Atlantic, meaning anything dropped inside could drift or decompose beyond recovery. The only way to test the theory was to drain the entire cavity, a process that took more than 8 hours under supervision of technical divers and environmental officers. As the water receded, fragments of old rope, rusted metal, and silt appeared, but no trace of human remains. Police collected sediment samples for laboratory analysis in Lisbon, along with several items found nearby: a 6.35 firearm, an older corroded gun believed to be over 50 years old, pieces of fabric, and bone fragments that initial tests indicated were animal. For investigators, the absence of clear evidence was not a failure. One senior officer told reporters, "It's not useless. Every place we eliminate brings us closer to where she is, or where she isn't." The return to Atalaia also signified a psychological shift in the investigation. For years, official efforts had focused on apartments, vehicles, and digital data. Now, the attention was turning downward toward the earth itself. The imagery of the drained well resonated deeply, with the public water yielding its secrets, time literally being pulled from the ground. Even skeptics who doubted Brueckner's guilt admitted that this was the most methodical operation since 2007. Why this well, and why now? Investigators cited several factors: a combination of geographic plausibility, fresh intelligence, and the urgency of time. The well's coordinates fell within what analysts called a 15-minute disposal zone, the distance a local driver could cover between the Ocean Club and remote farmland without being noticed. Witness reports from early May 2007 mention a white van parked near Atalaia, similar to one Brueckner was known to use. There were also hints from his digital records phone pings, photographs that placed him in the general vicinity around that period. None of this constituted proof, but the overlaps were enough to revive an old theory that the truth about Madeleine's fate might lie not in the rooms above ground, but in the wells below. From a procedural standpoint, draining the well was a necessary escalation. Radar scanning can detect anomalies, but only emptying the cavity allows biological residue to be sampled directly. Portuguese authorities, cautious after years of media scrutiny, ensured every step was documented and witnessed by independent observers. The operation drew parallels to cold cases elsewhere in Europe, where submerged evidence, bones, weapons, even vehicles had been discovered decades later. Still, as evening fell over Atalaia, the scene grew eerily quiet. The pumps stopped, the hoses curled on dry soil, and officers stood at the rim of the empty shaft, staring into the hollow cylinder that had once been full of water and speculation. Nothing conclusive had emerged, yet the symbolism was unmistakable. After 18 years, investigators had finally forced the case to look into its own depths. When reporters asked whether the search had brought them any closer to answers, one detective replied carefully, "We found what we needed to find. Whether it speaks or not, that's another matter. If they found nothing, does it mean nothing was ever there, or that it was once there and gone?" When investigators revisited the maps of Praia da Luz in 2025, one contrast stood out immediately. The 2007 search grids, the ones drawn in the chaotic weeks after Madeleine McCann vanished, had covered the eastern side of the resort in meticulous, almost obsessive detail. Every footpath toward the beach, every storage shed near the Ocean Club, every stretch of scrubland east of the main road had been combed and photographed. Yet the western perimeter, a landscape of low hills and abandoned wells extending toward Budens, was largely untouched. On the original topographic maps, the west was little more than a blank zone marked private farmland. In the newly updated police survey, it appeared as an open scar of opportunity, an area that had been hiding in plain sight for 18 years. The recently declassified field document listed more than 30 disused wells scattered between Budens and Luz. Some sat behind half-collapsed stone fences, others inside neglected citrus groves or near derelict barns overtaken by vines. None were ever sealed, recorded, or inspected during the initial 2007 operation. The reason, at the time, was both logistical and political. The Portuguese authorities were under immense pressure from British media to focus on abduction routes and potential traffickers, not on rural concealment. Helicopters, sniffer dogs, and volunteers all concentrated around the apartment blocks and beach access points, while the western farmland remained a blind spot both geographically and psychologically. From above, the area looks deceptively serene, rolling olive fields broken by sudden dark holes. But beneath that pastoral surface lies a labyrinth of water and limestone, a geological network that quietly undermines the Algarve. Each well is a vertical artery, plunging 20 to 40 meters before feeding into a subterranean aquifer that flows steadily toward the Atlantic. Local hydrologists describe it as underground river system, a natural drainage web that erodes, collapses, and reforms over decades. For any investigator, this complexity poses a nightmare. If an object or a body enters one well, it might not remain there for long. Currents can shift it, bury it in sediment, or carry it toward the sea. This is why retired Detective Gonçalo Amaral, who led the first Portuguese investigation before being removed from the case, once remarked, "If she was hidden in water, no dogs would find her." It was not cynicism, it was science. Cadaver dogs detect scent molecules released by decomposing tissue into the air. Water, however, seals those gases beneath its surface. Unless a body floats or leaks fluids into dry soil nearby, the dogs have nothing to pick up. Amaral's comment, once dismissed as defeatism, now sounds almost prophetic. The more investigators learn about Algarve's hydrography, the more his statement rings true. Technically, the process of odor suppression underwater is simple but absolute. Decomposition produces volatile compounds, putrescine, cadaverine, ammonia that dissipate into the atmosphere under normal conditions. In a sealed or waterlogged environment, those gases dissolve and remain trapped. The well becomes a contained microclimate, cool and oxygen poor, slowing bacterial activity to a fraction of the usual rate. Instead of weeks, decomposition might stretch into years. Forensic pathologists call this aquapreservation. Fatty tissues transform into adipocere, a waxy substance that can encase bones and even fragments of clothing. Water doesn't merely hide evidence, it delays time itself. Portuguese forensic teams learned this lesson the hard way. In 1998, a missing woman from the Algarve town of Silves was discovered 7 years after her disappearance, buried at the bottom of a disused irrigation well. Her body was remarkably intact, protected by layers of cool mud and stagnant water. When divers finally reached her, they found strands of hair still clinging to the skull and traces of clothing preserved against the stone. The case became a regional cautionary tale, demonstrating how a simple rural structure could swallow the truth for nearly a decade. To those who have studied the McCann case, that precedent looms large. If a similar fate befell Madeleine, the well could easily have concealed her all these years, escaping every radar sweep and canine search. Looking again at the terrain, the western sector of Praia da Luz feels almost designed for disappearance. The land slopes gently toward the coast, cut by dirt paths that locals once used to reach the cliffs. Between the 1990s and early 2000s, urban development spread eastward, leaving the western farms semi-abandoned. Most wells date from the 1950s, when farmers dug them manually and lined them with rough stone. With agriculture declining, These openings were left unsecured, some covered only by a sheet of metal, others completely open. Over time, vegetation grew thick enough to obscure them entirely from view. Satellite images taken in 2025 reveal dozens of circular shadows hidden among shrubs, each one capable of concealing a car tire, a backpack, or worse. Technically, these wells connect to the same hydrological channel that runs beneath Boudens and empties into the sea near Burgos. Divers who inspected one of them in 2020 reported that after 15 meters, the shaft veers horizontally into a narrow conduit filled with silt. Following it would require specialized cave diving equipment. In practice, that means most of these sites remain unexplored. Even when authorities deploy pumps, they rarely reach the bedrock. Water from surrounding layers seeps back in within hours, refilling the shaft and erasing the disturbance. The environment itself resists intrusion. For investigators in 2025, this realization reframed the geography of the case. Instead of viewing the Algarve as a flat map dotted with tourist landmarks, they began to see it as a vertical landscape, one that extends downward, into darkness. Every unsealed well became a potential timeline, a capsule of 2007 preserved underground. The challenge was no longer just to locate these wells, but to understand how they interacted, how water flow could transfer trace evidence between them, how minerals might preserve microscopic fragments of bone or fabric. New forensic technology offered some hope: mass spectrometry capable of detecting human DNA in sediment samples as old as 20 years. For the first time, the invisible might become visible. Still, the emotional weight of this search is undeniable. Each well is both a possibility and a grave. Locals remember that police dogs once barked near certain farm roads west of the village, but were called away before full excavation. Others recall rumors of tourists exploring fields in 2007 and hearing the echo of water below. Those memories feed the enduring myth of the Western Shadow, the part of Luz that has always refused to give up its secrets. The geography here tells a story that runs parallel to the official timeline. While the McCann family's apartment faced east toward the ocean, and the rising sun, the truth, if it exists in physical form, may have settled to the west, beneath layers of limestone and time. It is the part of the map that was never colored in, the place no one wanted to look because it represented failure. Now, with the 2025 search focusing precisely there, investigators are forced to confront what was once ignored. Science, geography, and history converge in these dark shafts. Water hides, but it also preserves. The question is, what exactly did it preserve? The house stands in silence on the western edge of Atalaia, half buried under dry grass and cracked plaster. From the road it looks abandoned, shutters hanging loose, roof tiles missing, the faint outline of a satellite dish rusted in place. Yet locals remember it differently. In the early 2000s, this ruin was alive with noise and an old van parked outside, the glow of a cigarette in the window, a man with a large dog who drifted in and out at odd hours. That man was Christian Brueckner. The house sits only 600 meters from the well that police drained in June 2025. The two locations, his temporary shelter and the pit that may hold answers, form a straight line across the scrubland, ending at the cliffs where the Atlantic begins. When ITV News reported from the site during the latest search, correspondent Ellie Pitt noted the investigators' choice of words. He knew it well, one officer said of Brueckner. He walked through here and lived nearby. The phrase lingered, less a statement of geography than of familiarity. The area of Atalaia was not just within his reach, it was part of his routine. The dirt paths, the abandoned wells, the hidden water tanks scattered across the fields, he had seen them all long before Madeleine McCann disappeared. Witness accounts collected between 2008 and 2017 confirm that several locals remembered seeing Brueckner near water structures. One former property caretaker recalled, he used to sit close to the reservoir behind the farmhouse, looking down into the hole like he was thinking. Not drinking, not working, just sitting there. Another remembered a similar pattern at dusk. He walked his dog around the old cistern. He always carried a flashlight, even when it was still light out. These recollections, trivial at the time, gained new weight when investigators connected them to the precise coordinates of the 2025 excavation. The well itself sits at the intersection of two disused farm trails. One leads toward Brueckner's former residence, the other slopes down to the coast. In daylight, the distance is a 10-minute walk. At night, in 2007, with no streetlights or surveillance cameras, it would have been invisible. When detectives plotted the potential routes available that night, the paths accessible by foot, van, or motorbike, the line from his house to the well stood out not only as the shortest, but also the most secluded. Telecommunication records later filled the gap. Cell tower logs from the evening of May 3, 2007, the night Madeleine vanished, show that Brueckner's phone connected briefly to a transmitter covering the Atalaia sector. It was a short signal, less than half an hour, yet enough to place him within 2 kilometers of the drained well. Investigators have long debated the reliability of such data. Phones can connect to towers beyond visual range, and interference in coastal regions is common. But the timing was suspicious. The ping occurred between 9:13 and 9:38 p.m., precisely when the McCanns were dining at the tapas restaurant and checking on their children in intervals. German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters, who has overseen the case since 2020, later summarized the findings bluntly: "We have strong circumstantial evidence linking Christian B. to the scene and the time." Wolters has never disclosed what that evidence entails, only that it includes digital data, witness statements, and the suspect's known patterns of movement. For years, his team has faced criticism for lacking physical proof, yet the cumulative weight of coincidences keeps the focus on Brueckner. When the 2025 search expanded into Atalaia, investigators reframed these clues into what they called the water route hypothesis. The theory proposed a single, practical chain of disposal from the suspect's residence to the nearby well, and possibly onward to the ocean through the natural aquifer that runs beneath the land. Unlike hasty concealment in open terrain, this method would have offered 2 strategic advantages: time and silence. The body, once submerged, would be shielded from scent detection, and decomposition would slow drastically. In essence, it was a slow but safe erasure, one that could outlast both investigators and public memory. Mapping this route reveals its chilling efficiency. The dirt track from the house passes a cluster of ruined animal sheds, then forks toward the water pit, surrounded by cane grass. From there, another hidden trail descends through a dry ravine toward the beach west of Luz, where erosion and sea spray blur any trace of movement. Satellite imagery shows that these paths existed in 2007, almost exactly as they do now, unchanged, unlit, forgotten. The entire circuit covers less than a mile. For someone who knew the terrain intimately, the journey would have taken 15 minutes. Investigators believe that Brueckner's van, a cream-colored Volkswagen, could have reached the well site undetected. Tire marks found decades later in the surrounding clay were long since eroded, but locals remember the vehicle parked in that area many nights in 2006 and 2007. One witness described hearing its engine idling near the cliff road long after midnight. The proximity between those sightings and the Atalaia well is impossible to ignore. Still, none of this constitutes proof beyond doubt. No direct forensic link ties Brueckner to Madeleine, and he continues to deny involvement. In letters sent from prison to German media outlets, he called the investigation a modern witch hunt, insisting that prosecutors are trying to build a murder without a body. Yet even his denials seem to orbit the same geography. "I never buried anything," he wrote once. "The land here is hard, rocky, you couldn't dig a grave even if you tried." To investigators, that statement sounded less like innocence and more like inadvertent confirmation. If the ground is impossible to dig, water becomes the next logical option. The water route hypothesis also fits a psychological pattern. Brueckner's known behavior shows a fascination with isolation and water. Former acquaintances remember him fishing alone for hours, bathing in reservoirs, even storing rainwater in barrels near his van. When asked about these habits, Wolters commented, "He knows the water here. He used it to survive. It would not surprise us if he used it to hide." The line between survival and concealment blurs easily in such a landscape. Forensic analysts studying the area note that if a body were ever placed in the well, microparticles, trace elements of bone collagen or textile fibers, could still linger in the sediment even after years of flushing. That possibility justified the 2025 excavation, though nothing conclusive emerged. Still, the pattern remains compelling. Brueckner lived close enough to the site to know it, had the means to access it, and possessed both the solitude and the motive to use it. The Atalaia well is now cordoned off by police tape, a symbol of everything unresolved. Journalists who visited the scene after the search described the air as heavy, the ground disturbed by machinery, the silence total. Nearby, Brueckner's old house remains locked but still standing. On its western wall, a crack runs from the roof down to the foundation like a seam between two stories, the visible and the buried. Every case has its geography, and this one is drawn in water and distance. The well, the house, the sea. 3 points forming a triangle of disappearance. Whether Madeleine's fate is hidden somewhere within that shape remains uncertain, but the logic of the terrain is difficult to refute. As one investigator said quietly while packing up the site, "If he wanted to make her vanish, this is where the land teaches you how." And yet, beneath every theory lies a deeper question. The wells around Luz have existed for centuries, long before Brueckner arrived. Their darkness belongs to the landscape itself, not to one man alone, which raises the final, unsettling thought. If Brueckner didn't use the well, who did, and why is the theory older than him? In the frantic summer of 2007, when the disappearance of Madeleine McCann first shattered the quiet rhythms of Praia da Luz, the police drew their maps with urgency and fear. Search teams fanned out from the Ocean Club apartments toward the beach, tracing what they called possible abduction routes. Roads leading east toward Lagos were closed, and helicopters circled above the coastline scanning for vehicles or movement. Cadaver dogs sniffed through hotel basements, beach dunes, and rental houses. Yet, almost no one went west. The wells, cisterns, and irrigation pits scattered across the farmland beyond the village were not part of the official perimeter. At the time, those dark holes seemed irrelevant to an abduction scenario. The story the world believed, and that police were pressured to pursue, was one of a child taken by an intruder, not hidden by the land itself. That decision shaped everything that followed. Forensic teams spent weeks sifting through soil and drains on the eastern side of Luz while the western fields, dotted with dozens of unsealed wells, remained untouched. By the time investigators reconsidered the terrain, the media storm had already shifted to suspicion of the parents, then to international political tension between British and Portuguese authorities. The wells were forgotten in the noise. Years later, the landscape began whispering back. In 2014, a group of local residents from the outskirts of Praia da Luz contacted municipal authorities after noticing a foul odor near an old well behind the village golf course. They claimed the smell was chemical, not natural, and that stray animals refused to approach the area. A few villagers even recalled police activity there in 2007, though no record exists of any formal inspection. Despite the complaint, no team was ever dispatched. The lead investigator in the reopened case reportedly dismissed it as decomposing vegetation. In the Portuguese archive, the incident is a single paragraph, an opportunity noted, then ignored. By 2018, the well theory returned to headlines, this time through the tabloid Correio da Man. The newspaper published an explosive report suggesting a British couple might have accidentally caused Madeleine's death, possibly in a car accident, and hidden the body in a rural well to avoid scandal. The claim sparked outrage and disbelief. German investigators, who were by then monitoring the case, refused to pursue the lead, calling it speculative and without evidentiary basis. No new search was authorized. The theory faded again, dismissed as sensationalism from a media landscape desperate for fresh angles on a decade-old tragedy. Then in 2020, the tide shifted once more. German police publicly named Christian Brueckner as their prime suspect, and Portuguese divers were dispatched to 3 abandoned wells near Budens, about a 15-minute drive west of Praia da Luz. These shafts, each more than 30 meters deep, had long been rumored as possible dumping sites. Divers descended through cold, opaque water, collecting samples from the silt. The operation lasted 2 days. When it ended, officials announced the results: no human remains, no new clues. The wells were sealed, but the myth surrounding them only grew. The absence of evidence seemed to make them even more mysterious, silent witnesses to something no one could quite define. In 2023, the investigation moved inland to a new location, the Arade Dam, a secluded reservoir north of Silves that Brueckner once called his little paradise. German authorities led the search, assisted by Portuguese police. Over several days, officers drained sections of shoreline, sifted through mud, and collected potential artifacts: a bra strap, a few pieces of fabric, scraps of plastic. Nothing linked to Madeleine. When reporters asked why they had chosen that site, a prosecutor explained that Brueckner's photos from 2006 showed him visiting the area repeatedly. Still, the lack of results left the public wary. The well theory had become a ghost within the investigation, visible, then forgotten, then revived again each time evidence ran dry. By 2025, when search teams returned to Atalaia, the narrative had come full circle. For the first time in 18 years, police drained a well completely, using industrial pumps and geo-radar to scan the cavity. It was not just another symbolic gesture, but a deliberate acknowledgement that earlier searches might have overlooked the most obvious hiding places. As the water receded, cameras captured the wet stone walls glistening in the sun, a haunting image of time emptied out. Investigators retrieved debris, animal bones, and fragments of clothing, none definitively human. Yet for many observers, this act felt different. It was as though the authorities were finally confronting what they had long feared: that the land itself, not a human abductor, might have been the accomplice all along. Why, then, did it take nearly 2 decades to reach that point? The answer lies in the practical and psychological barriers that surrounded the well theory. Access was the first problem. Many wells lie on private or unmarked property, requiring legal warrants, specialized equipment, and safety protocols for hazardous environments. Each operation costs tens of thousands of euros and poses serious risks to divers. Unlike open fields, wells cannot be calmed by volunteers or search dogs. They demand expertise, patience, and resources that few departments could spare once international pressure shifted elsewhere. But beneath those logistical challenges lies a deeper reason, one tied to collective psychology. The idea of a child submerged in water carries a particular horror. Water does not just hide, it consumes. For the public, it is easier to imagine a kidnapping, a villain with a face, than a death swallowed by silence. Even investigators fall prey to this emotional logic. Searching a well feels less like solving a case and more like disturbing a grave. The darkness, the smell, the echo, it transforms investigation into ritual. And so, for years, everyone preferred to look at the surface: apartments, cars, suspects, theories that could be debated in daylight. The wells remained beneath both ground and conscience. When police finally lowered their equipment into the Atalaia shaft, it was as if the case had circled back to its beginning, geographically and symbolically. The operation acknowledged what had long been denied: that the truth might lie below, not above. Whether or not the well contained answers was almost secondary. The act of draining it was itself a confession of oversight, a recognition that, for 18 years, investigators had avoided the very depths that might have mattered most. Every time they looked elsewhere, the water stayed silent. In every mystery, there comes a point when geography becomes psychology. The search for Madeleine McCann has long been a study in coordinates, maps, GPS pings, satellite images, but beneath all those lines lies something less visible: the symbolic weight of water. To investigators, it is a physical element, a place where evidence can hide or decay. To the public, it has become a metaphor of memory, guilt, and the depths where truth might sleep. Water, in the collective imagination, is not just a medium, it is a mirror. It reflects what people fear to face on land. Across centuries of myth and literature, water has represented the unconscious. It swallows clarity, distorts sound, and blurs boundaries. When detectives drain a well, they are not merely removing liquid, they are lowering themselves into the realm of what has been repressed. In psychoanalytic terms, the well functions like the mind's buried chamber, holding the memories society cannot process. The deeper they pump, the more intimate the questions become: not only where is she, but why do we need to know? This symbolism is not unique to the McCann case. It echoes eerily through the story of John Bennett Ramsey, another blonde child whose death became both spectacle and national wound. In the Ramsey home, Investigators photographed the bathroom a space of cleansing and intimacy as part of the crime scene. Later, analysts would note how water, the element of purity, had turned into a backdrop for guilt. The Ramseys were accused of washing away evidence, a metaphor that fused the literal act of cleaning with the psychological act of denial. In both narratives, water transformed from life to concealment. It became a moral solvent, a symbol of something that must be drained before truth could surface. The Madeleine investigation inherited that imagery almost unconsciously. Every mention of a well, every televised scene of officers pumping muddy water, triggered a collective memory of past cases where liquid and guilt intertwined. When journalists described the 2025 operation, their language slipped into metaphor. Searching the depths, draining the past, pulling darkness into light. News anchors spoke of the bottom of the well, as if it were not a place but an idea, the furthest point one must reach before redemption. This is how media constructs modern myth. By repeating certain images, water, depth, silence, it creates a shared vocabulary of mystery. In television reports, the Atalaia well was filmed from above, the camera looking straight down into darkness. That vertical angle, so simple, turned the scene into an icon. It was not just about a child's disappearance, it was about civilization's fear of what lies beneath its surface. As viewers watched, they were not witnessing a search for evidence, they were witnessing a ritual descent. A viewer wrote, "F water remembers. What does it remember of her?" The line struck a chord across platforms. It framed the question not as an investigation, but as an invocation. If water holds memory as folklore often claims, then perhaps it also holds judgment. What has the well witnessed? What has it kept? The idea is poetic but also revealing. It shows how the public's emotional investment has shifted from proof to meaning. After 18 years of uncertainty, people no longer ask what happened. They ask what it signifies. From a sociological perspective, this shift speaks to a collective faith in depth. Across cultures, there is a persistent belief that truth must rise from the bottom. We imagine justice as something buried that must ascend through effort, courage, and revelation. This belief is both empowering and tragic. It drives endless searches, yet it also traps us in cycles of excavation, digging not only through soil, but through our own need for resolution. In the McCann case, the well became a public stage for that belief. When water gushed out of the pumps during the 2025 search, viewers described a sense of catharsis, as if the act itself, emptying the dark, was a form of purification. Sociologists studying public reactions noted that the drained well functioned as a communal therapy session. People posted comments saying they finally felt something moving. Even though no evidence was found, the motion of water became a substitute for justice. This phenomenon reveals a paradox. The physical emptiness of the well only deepened its symbolic fullness. It proved that what the crowd sought was not necessarily proof of death, but proof that someone was still looking. The collective obsession with location, where is she, is really about the human fear of disappearance itself. We cannot bear the idea that something could vanish without trace, because it mirrors our own anxiety about being forgotten. That is why the image of draining water resonates so powerfully. In moral terms, it represents the desire to separate clarity from corruption, to make what is murky transparent again. Every gallon pumped from the well becomes a metaphor for truth reclaimed from decay. Yet, paradoxically, the more we drain, the more we realize the limits of our control. What lies at the bottom might not be a revelation, but an echo, a reflection of our own expectations. The ethics of obsession emerge here. Our fixation on finding Madeleine's body, on transforming mystery into remains, reveals more about us than about her. As one British columnist wrote, "We search not to bring her home, but to bring ourselves peace." This observation aligns with what psychologists call closure bias, the need to finish an unfinished story, even at the cost of bending its truth. The relentless focus on the well, the dam, the water, has become less about evidence and more about emotional bookkeeping. We cannot allow the case to remain open, because it mirrors our own unresolved griefs. But perhaps closure was never part of the truth. The world's gaze into the well may not yield justice, it may only expose the depth of our longing for it. The water, after all, is indifferent. It hides, preserves, reflects. It does not answer. In the end, the symbolism of water in the Madeleine McCann case is both universal and deeply personal. It speaks to how humans externalize guilt and hope, projecting them onto nature, as if the earth itself could confess. When the pumps fell silent in Atalaia, and the camera showed the empty shaft glimmering in sunlight, the scene resembled less a crime investigation than a psychological mirror. The well looked back at us, quietly asking what we were really searching for. But what if closure was never part of the truth? In every investigation, the line between what is known and what can be proven defines the distance between truth and justice. The Madeleine McCann case stands on that fragile boundary, haunted by fragments of evidence that hint at a story but never quite tell it. Over 18 years, investigators have collected physical traces that form a constellation of possibilities: scents, DNA fragments, ticket stubs, digital shadows, and, most recently, the emptied silence of a well. None of these alone can solve the mystery, yet together they draw the outline of something undeniable, a presence that once was and is no longer there. It began, as many stories of loss do, with the dogs. In August 2007, British cadaver dog Eddie and blood detection dog Keela were brought to Praia da Luz to examine apartment 5A, the McCann's holiday rental. Their reactions were immediate and specific. Eddie alerted to the scent of human decomposition near the wardrobe, behind the sofa, and in the trunk of the Renault Scenic the family had rented 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. Keela, trained to detect blood, marked similar locations. To observers, the sequence was chilling. But science is rarely that simple. Odor molecules can cling to objects for months, and canine indications are considered supportive, not conclusive. The Portuguese laboratory found no matching human tissue, and the alerts, while powerful, remained circumstantial. The dogs had spoken, but the evidence could not testify. Then came the DNA results, the most debated numbers in the case. 15 of 19 genetic markers reportedly consistent with Madeleine's profile were found in samples from the car's trunk. To the public, it sounded definitive. To forensic experts, it was not. The quantity was too small, the mixture too complex, the contamination risk too high. Partial DNA cannot meet the legal threshold for proof. One analyst compared it to hearing half a sentence whispered through static. It suggests meaning, but cannot be repeated in court. By the time the sample was reviewed by British and Portuguese labs, its interpretive value had evaporated. The McCanns were cleared of suspicion, but the questions the data raised never went away. As the years passed, the physical trail grew colder until a new one appeared in plain sight. In August and early September 2025, 2 parking tickets issued in Hollywood Hills, Los Angeles, linked to a car registered to musician David Burke, reignited media speculation about another tragedy involving a body found in a vehicle. The eerie parallel reminded journalists that the McCann case, too, contained overlooked administrative evidence. Back in 2007, a single parking citation had been logged in Praia da Luz, issued to a van parked repeatedly near a restricted rural zone west of the resort. The registration was untraceable, possibly foreign, possibly stolen, but the timing matched the night of May 3. Police reports mention it briefly, then drop it entirely, lost amid hundreds of tips. The slip of paper remains one of many ghost documents, tiny bureaucratic fossils of a moment that might have mattered. Technology offered other glimpses. Rumors persist of unreleased satellite imagery captured by a private defense contractor over the Algarve that week. Officially, the images were too low in resolution to aid the investigation. Unofficially, several analysts claimed they showed a vehicle departing Praia da Luz around 10 p.m., heading west toward Boudens, the same direction as the unsearched wells. Whether that vehicle belonged to the McCanns, a friend, or a stranger has never been clarified. The footage, if it exists, remains classified, a digital relic locked behind layers of jurisdiction and diplomacy. Then there are the physical remains that have surfaced, decade by decade, like messages in bottles. In 2025, during the renewed excavation in Atalaia, police cataloged a modest collection: a .635 Nullard pistol, a corroded older firearm, animal bones, and fragments of clothing tangled in the sediment. None matched Madeleine. Forensic reports indicated that the bones were from a goat or small dog, the fabric from adult garments. Yet investigators did not call the search useless. Each negative result closed another possible hiding place, narrowing the geography of disappearance. As one officer said to reporters, "The well gave us nothing, but it gave us a direction." That phrase captures the paradox of the case, how the absence of evidence has become its own kind of testimony. In criminal forensics, silence can be interpreted in two opposite ways. It can mean that nothing happened or that something happened perfectly. Madeleine's case demonstrates the second possibility, the existence of a crime so carefully erased that even its residues contradict one another. Cadaver dogs smell death where DNA cannot prove it. Tickets record movement where cameras cannot see it. Wells are drained only to reveal their emptiness. Each piece of data seems to negate the last, forming a mosaic of contradictions that still, somehow, feels coherent. The legal system, however, has no patience for coherence without proof. Under both Portuguese and German law, a murder charge requires either a body or irrefutable forensic evidence of death. Circumstantial data, even when overwhelming, cannot cross that threshold. Prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters acknowledged this limitation in 2024, saying, "We are convinced of his guilt, but we cannot yet prove it." The "yet" has become a haunting word in itself. It keeps the case alive, suspended between belief and verification. The law demands material certainty, morality demands closure. Neither has been satisfied. This tension raises a deeper question about the nature of truth in long-term investigations. What happens when physical evidence refuses to speak? Does justice depend on objects, or can it reside in collective understanding? The McCann case, after nearly 2 decades, suggests that truth may not be a thing one finds but a pattern one recognizes, a constellation of small, incomplete signals that together form an undeniable outline of tragedy. By 2025, the physical record of the case resembles an archaeological site more than a crime scene. Each artifact, every trace of scent, fragment of DNA, ticket, or photograph has been lifted, tested, and archived until nothing remains but interpretations. The official files fill thousands of pages, yet the core mystery is no less opaque than it was on that warm night in May 2007. The most haunting evidence, then, may be the void itself, the way the landscape has refused to yield the one thing that could transform conjecture into certainty. No confession, no body, no definitive trace. Only echoes, the dogs barking in an empty apartment, the hum of pumps drawing nothing but water, the soft click of cameras aimed at a hole that will not answer. Perhaps that is what the well symbolizes in the end, not a place of concealment, but a vessel of silence. It reflects our obsession with tangible proof, our faith that the earth must one day return what it has taken. But maybe the earth has already spoken, and we have simply failed to understand its language. The well gave them nothing, but maybe it gave them the last thing they needed, an ending. 18 years after Madeleine McCann vanished, the case no longer lives in courtrooms or police archives. It exists in the public mind, a trial without a judge, argued daily across continents. The modern world has turned the investigation into a theater of interpretation, where facts compete with feelings and speculation fills the gaps that evidence left empty. In this space, the media firewall, the invisible boundary between information and insinuation, determines who controls the story. British outlets, the first to inherit the tragedy, built that firewall carefully. Mainstream networks like the BBC, Sky News, and The Guardian maintain a tone of restraint. They report procedural updates, quote official statements, and avoid direct accusations. For them, the Madeleine case is still an open wound, one that requires sensitivity toward the McCanns and the fragile relationship between the UK and Portugal. Editors understand the legal minefield of libel and defamation, sharpened by years of lawsuits that followed early coverage. The press learned to use distance as a form of protection. Phrases like alleged suspect, possible connection, and unconfirmed theory became their shield. Beneath this professionalism lies a quiet fear. To step too close to speculation is to risk reigniting the outrage that once consumed them. Across the Atlantic, the tone changes. In the United States, true crime media thrives on emotional immediacy. Podcasts, Netflix documentaries, and YouTube channels dissect the case with cinematic rhythm, favoring narrative over nuance. When the well theory resurfaced in 2025, it spread not through official statements but through thumbnails, reaction videos, and amateur analyses. American coverage reframed the drained well in Atalaia not as a forensic operation, but as a symbol of visual metaphor of discovery and reckoning. Channels with millions of subscribers uploaded footage from ITV and AP, editing slow pans of the empty shaft with ominous music. The well, one popular creator declared, is the final witness. In the algorithmic echo chamber, symbolism became fact. YouTube's influence transformed the case into a form of collective authorship. Each creator added commentary, overlaying subtitles, theories, and timelines until the footage itself became secondary. Some videos gained more views than official news broadcasts. For local residents in Algarve, this global fascination came with a different cost. Their landscape, the quiet villages, the limestone fields, the wells and cliffs, was rebranded as the geography of crime. Every drone shot used in foreign documentaries turned their home into a backdrop of menace. Tourism dipped in the years following each wave of renewed attention. They talk about our town like it's cursed. One cafe owner told a reporter in 2025, "To them, it's not Portugal. It's a crime scene." The community's frustration reflects an overlooked truth when the world treats a place as evidence. It strips the people living there of innocence. The same disconnect appears online, where Koch detectives have replaced official investigators. On social, subforums dedicated to the case host thousands of armchair analysts posting satellite maps, measuring distances between wells, comparing Brueckner's phone data with topographic coordinates. Threads titled, "Unsearched Wells Near Atalaia," with Google Earth links, circulate like open-source police files. On X, users share grainy screenshots of satellite imagery, claiming to spot vehicles or shadows, often misinterpreting natural features as clues. Some go further, editing composite maps of potential dump sites and labeling them with red circles as if they were solving a digital puzzle. This crowdsourced obsession has a strange power. On one hand, it demonstrates collective intelligence. On the other, it reveals collective voyeurism. Online sleuths operate with the confidence of proximity, but without accountability. Their investigations run parallel to official ones, sometimes aiding visibility, but more often clouding it. The result is a paradox: the democratization of detection that erodes trust in real detectives. In forums, truth becomes a consensus rather than a conclusion, built from likes and retweets instead of evidence. Sociologists call this phenomenon participatory forensics. It blurs the line between information and identification. The well, once a physical site, becomes a digital one, a point of convergence for curiosity, empathy, and spectacle. Each new drone image or leaked police document triggers waves of analysis. People post at midnight, circling screenshots, convinced they see patterns invisible to professionals. The act of looking itself becomes addictive. It's not about solving the case anymore, it's about belonging to the search. Meanwhile, traditional journalists struggle to navigate the noise. The British press, still cautious under its firewall, occasionally quotes social media speculation only to immediately disclaim it. American outlets amplify it for ratings. Between these poles lies a moral vacuum where facts dissolve into interpretations. The internet has replaced the autopsy report with the comment section, the crime scene with the feed. The truth no longer emerges from investigation, it trends. The ethical implications run deep. Every click on a well theory video rewards algorithms that monetize tragedy. Every retweet of an unverified claim drags the case further from the forensic and closer to the emotional. The digital attention economy transforms suffering into engagement. In this cycle, Madeleine herself disappears again, not as a person, but as content. The story no longer belongs to law enforcement or even to her family. It belongs to the crowd. And yet, this crowd believes it is doing good. Each social media thread opens with the same justification. If we keep talking about her, she won't be forgotten. There is sincerity in that impulse, but also danger. The collective hunt for meaning risks becoming a form of possession where remembering the victim turns into owning the narrative. The moral line blurs between empathy and exploitation. By 2025, as footage of the drained Atalaia well circled the globe, one could feel the saturation point approaching. The image of the well had escaped its context. It no longer represented geography or evidence. It represented us, the audience, staring into darkness. desperate to see something that might reflect our effort. As one commentator wrote, "The well is no longer a place. It's a metaphor for how far we're willing to dig into others' lives." That single sentence captures the paradox of modern true crime. We keep digging because silence feels unbearable. We excavate strangers' pain, confident that our curiosity equals justice. But somewhere between empathy and intrusion, the moral ground collapses. The well, both literal and digital, becomes a mirror not of what happened to Madeleine, but of what has happened to us. 18 years have passed since a little girl disappeared from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, and yet the silence remains intact. No body, no definitive cause, no confession, no closure, only the slow formation of what one investigator once called circles of truth. Each circle expands outward, first around the family, then the police, then the public, then the entire world, all orbiting the same emptiness. The center of the mystery is no longer a child, but an absence that refuses to be filled. The official record remains open but motionless. Every search, every tip, every excavation returns the same echo: nothing confirmed, nothing denied. The well at Atalaia gave no body, the dam gave no trace, the car gave no certainty, and the DNA gave no proof. Yet each failure somehow feels like progress. It is as if the investigation has become an act of faith, the belief that continuing to look will eventually create meaning, even when the evidence does not cooperate. After 18 years, the McCann case has ceased to be a question of what happened and become a question of how justice survives without proof. Across legal systems, a body is more than evidence. It is closure. It allows courts to name a crime, journalists to print an ending, and families to grieve without imagination. But here, the absence of a body has become the story itself. The lack of remains has turned the investigation into a philosophical riddle. Can justice exist when its object is invisible? For many, the answer is yes if courage replaces certainty. Former Detective John Wedger, reflecting on cold cases in 2024, said it simply: justice doesn't begin with accusation, but with the courage to look at what's buried. His words cut through the noise of speculation. They remind us that justice is not a single verdict. It is a sustained act of looking in insistence on facing what society would rather turn away from. In the McCann case, that courage lies in persistence, in the willingness to drain the same wells again and again, to ask the same impossible questions until silence finally flinches. The moral weight of this endurance, however, falls on everyone: the police, the media, and the public. Investigators have learned that physical truth is not enough. It must coexist with moral truth. Media figures have learned that compassion without skepticism turns quickly into propaganda. And the audience, who have followed every twist from Lisbon to London to YouTube, have learned that their empathy can become exploitation when it demands spectacle instead of answers. This is the ethical crossroad the case now occupies. Do we pursue truth, or do we pursue comfort? The world's obsession with Madeleine's story often confuses the two. Compassion feels righteous, but it can be hijacked by narrative, by the need to keep the tragedy alive, so that it continues to mean something to us. The line between empathy and entertainment thins each year. That is why this moment, more than any other, demands a recalibration of conscience. To the viewer, the question becomes personal. What does justice look like when it no longer produces headlines or arrests? What does it mean to demand truth when truth resists the language of proof? Perhaps it means learning to separate compassion from propaganda, to care deeply while refusing to be manipulated by the performance of caring. It means demanding evidence, not narrative, facts, not feelings. And above all, it means accepting that the absence of resolution does not absolve us of responsibility. The pursuit of truth is not about winning, it is about refusing to look away. The 2025 search at Atalaia demonstrated this paradox vividly. Cameras filmed the final minutes of the operation, the pumps growling, the hoses coiled, the water spiraling down until only mud and glimmering residue remained. Investigators stood at the rim of the shaft, peering into an emptiness that looked almost holy. When the machine stopped, the silence was total. The well was empty, and yet it felt full of years, of hope, of the quiet weight of human persistence. In that moment, the drained pit reflected more than water. It reflected the collective face of a world that refuses to let go of a vanished child. Perhaps that is where the meaning resides, not in finding a body, but in refusing indifference. Madeleine's case endures because it forces humanity to confront its own moral limitations, the limits of forensics, the limits of justice, and the limits of our tolerance for ambiguity. It teaches that not all mysteries end with revelation. Some end with recognition of how far we are willing to go, and how deep we are willing to look, to restore faith in the idea that truth still matters. Over the years, the case has become a prism through which every society sees itself. For Britain, it exposes the fragility of media ethics. For Portugal, it questions the competence of institutions. For Germany, it tests the definition of evidence. And for the global audience, it measures the cost of curiosity. Every viewer, commenter, and investigator adds another layer to the circles of truth, shaping a moral geometry around something that may never be solved. But perhaps this is how justice evolves in the modern age. When evidence fails, meaning takes its place. The case has become less about what happened to Madeleine and more about what her disappearance has done to us. It has revealed the way grief can migrate across borders, how people project their own unfinished sorrows onto someone else's tragedy. In that sense, Madeleine has never disappeared. She has been absorbed into collective memory, a presence without a body, a symbol of the unfinished story we all carry. As the sun sets over the Algarve, the imagery that remains is deceptively simple. The water pump slows, its mechanical breath fading into the wind. The well, drained of its secrets, sits open and still. A faint shimmer of light reflects off the remaining water at the bottom, trembling like the thin line between knowledge and belief. Around it, silence expands, a silence not of defeat, but of acknowledgement. The search for now has reached its limit, and yet, the story refuses to end. Every well, every unanswered question, every act of looking keeps her alive, not in myth, but in the moral imagination of those who cannot bear the thought of a world where truth disappears completely. Because in the end, this case is not just about Madeleine McCann. It is about us, the living, learning how to face what cannot be found. No one ever truly disappears in water. They just wait until truth becomes louder than comfort.